Um, First, I'll talk a little bit about me and how I became involved in research, and then I'll give some examples of my experiences of excellent co-production with the researchers here at Manchester University. And I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to get cracking. Um, Next slide, please, Leah. I guess Hello. Yeah, thanks. I guess I don't need to give this audience a trigger warning because it's already been mentioned. So I have lived experience of self-harm and suicide as a patient, service user and carer. 10 years ago, though, I knew nothing about research, but I had no idea how that would change. Next slide, please. By chance, I attended a poetry workshop in Manchester for people living with self-harm and suicide, and I met some of the research team from the university, including my hero, the wonderful Leah Quinn-Liven. She invited me to join a new lived experience group. Next slide, please. We called the lived experience group Mutual Support for Mental Health in Research, which rolls off the tongue, not MS for MHR, but we've got used to it. And given who we are and what we've been through, it takes trust and courage to participate honestly and openly in such a group. From the start, we understood our involvement was valued by the researchers. As people with lived experience over many years, we understand how the stigma associated with mental illness and self-harm and suicide in particular plays out in our lives. And each time we're involved in an activity or meeting, we revisit old trauma. Some of us have had bad experiences of care, and some of us struggle with continuing illness. And I'm sure you can imagine how this can be difficult or even triggering for some of us. Yet our researchers welcome us in such a kind and personal way. It feels like you're entering a safe, even therapeutic space. They treat us with respect, actively listening to each of us, making sure everyone who wants to speak can do so. They hear us extend and explore their understanding, and they give us credit for challenging them. Our researchers hold us safely, letting us leave painful conversations if we need a break, and then welcoming us back in when we're ready. Safety, support, kindness, and caring are built into their approach. And they were open and honest about the challenges we could face as we entered their world of academic and clinical research. So how does one of our meetings go? Well, it's not all gloom and doom. We're welcomed with a hug and coffee and biscuits and easygoing small talk, and it's friendly and relaxed. At the start of each meeting, we catch up with everyone and what they've been up to that's important to them. We don't do superficial icebreakers in our group. We're way beyond that. And we have a working lunch with due regard for people's food preferences. You might not realise it, but being involved in meaningful PPIE can be empowering for individuals and for the communities they're part of. By sharing our experiences as part of our I&E, our voices have grown in confidence. Some of our group have areas of influence and action beyond their involvement and networks of support, but for others, just being welcomed as part of the group is enough to bring a sense of self-worth, recognition that your worst experiences can help bring about positive change. Our researchers also ask us for our feedback after every meeting. This is really an important record of how we're feeling too, and gathering our ideas about anything that could be done better or new ideas that occur to you after the meeting. As a result of that, we developed our own individual well-being plans so our researchers can recognise if we're struggling and know who to contact. Next slide, please. Some of the activities we've been involved in include development of research questions and aims, where through discussions we question the question. None of our group are academics, so before we began qualitative data analysis of patient interviews, we were given training on how to code and theme. What was interesting was that our insights were really different to those of the master's students analysing the same data. Here was evidence of the contrast between lived and learned experience, so crucial for meaningful insights. We comment on drafts of papers before submission to journals, a sort of lived experience peer review process. Because of my humanities bias, I requested some stats analysis training before looking at big data. We were trying to understand what had happened to people who self-harmed during the pandemic. Manchester Uni paid for me to do an online course on FutureLearn, so I was no longer afraid of big numbers and graphs. I'm a language and literature person, so editing docs before submission, reading proposals, blog writing are all things I love. Track changes is my happy place. So to become a co-author on several papers feels like my skills are truly valued. Using and developing your public contributors' individual skill sets is way up the co-production ladder. Next slide, please. Other opportunities are offered to us through our researchers and via the university monthly social inclusion email. I'm on an ethics committee at Manchester, and I get to think through the EDI and PPIE aspects of PhD student research applications. Our group has grown in diversity over time, so we reach beyond the protected characteristics and include people with neurodiversities and varied educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. We also have different cultural and spiritual understandings of self-harm and suicide. Along with Jav, who's speaking next, I'm a mental health rep on the PSRC at Manchester, and we're about to co-develop training on understanding how to meaningfully and respectfully include people in research, thinking in particular about race, neurodiversity, and LGBTQ people. Our researchers ensure we know exactly what's involved in a task or activity, how long it should take, what the deadline is, and how much we can expect to be paid before we agree to be involved. There's no obligation that we should accept these offers. And just like a good supervisor, they recognise we also have busy lives, so may occasionally need an extension to a deadline. Our researchers also point out to us when we've done an activity or task which could be included on our CVs, such as co-authorship. It's great if we can use our INE experience for our own CPD. I've mentioned how PPIE can be therapeutic and lead to self-development, perhaps for some of us even creating some sort of post-traumatic growth. Our researchers at Manchester are leading the way in co-production. They go beyond the official guidelines, and the processes may be time-consuming, and they can bring about previously unrecognised assumptions, ambiguities, and tensions out into the open. Nobody said it was easy. Over the last 10 years, though, I feel as if I've witnessed a shift in public attitudes towards suicide and self-harm as it's become more openly talked about. So I nowadays proudly share my INE experiences with family, friends, and people I meet. Next slide, please. The photos on these slides were part of a public exhibition which we took into the city centre, as Liam mentioned earlier. We spoke with passers-by, from council officials to homeless people, tourists, cleaners, visitors, shoppers. We helped to destigmatise and normalise conversations about suicide with sensitivity and care, and we found people were definitely interested in the research that goes on at Manchester Uni. Today's another great opportunity for us to share our insights on being part of that research. And I hope these examples of my experience as a co-pro with MS for MHR have been interesting. What I've learned at Manchester from our researchers, I've come to describe as the Rolls-Royce of PPIE. Finally, a very gentle reminder, living with and caring for people with severe mental illness and suicidality is traumatizing, and the lack of support from services burdens carers and their families financially, emotionally, and socially. It disrupts family life and can ruin careers and relationships. So, like our researchers, please don't forget that and work with humility. Don't be afraid to be challenged. Learn to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. And my last word on this subject is, let there be cake, preferably homemade by one of the research team. Thanks for listening. I'm going to